All right, this is part 4 of understanding the purchase agreement as a buyer. If you haven't watched my other videos, I'm going over a basic Tennessee real estate contract. It is very similar from state to state. However, check with your state on what the contract specifically is written, as it may vary. Different states have different rules, different requirements, but all in all, the basis of this information goes across the board. We're keeping it very basic on understanding the cost, understanding the contingencies, understanding the timelines of what it takes as a purchaser, because what's going to happen when you go to purchase a home and you really like it, you're going to be signing a lot of paperwork. And it's kind of like the terms of condition that you agree to on a website that you have no idea, but you can't go forward. That's like this contract is in the state of Tennessee. It's typically 11 plus pages, and with that, you have a lot of information. So I'm just breaking it down for you. So today, what we're talking about is inspections. Before we get into it, if you would do me a favor, if you like the information that you're seeing on my page, please make sure to go and subscribe, hit the like button, and leave me a comment below on what you find is the most valuable out of this video. So let's talk about inspections. First of all, I will tell you as a lender, I never, ever, ever want to see a home inspection on a property. And you may be thinking, well, that's not right. You're going to be financing the home. Why is that? Because the inspection is for the purpose of your negotiations between you and the seller, and it can reveal a lot of things from the lending aspect that really plays no concern to us. One thing to make sure you understand, an inspection is different than an appraisal report. A lot of people, they get this confused and they say, oh, well, you're going to send an appraiser out. I don't need an inspection. That is not the case. The appraiser's job is specifically to go out on behalf of the lender and to evaluate a few things. Number one is their opinion of market value. That's supplying the comps. From the views of the inspection from an appraiser, depending on what kind of program they are doing the appraisal for example, a conventional is not going to have as stringent guidelines on the minimum property requirements. It's mainly looking at safety and health issues. If they are looking at it on the basis of an FHA or USDA or even VA loan, they are looking at minimum property requirements, which is not a full-blown inspection. An inspection, I tell my clients all the time, here's what's going to happen. And this is one of the first things you're going to do when you sign the contract. Your real estate agent is going to tell you, we need to set up the inspection. The inspector's job is to work on your behalf, and they are going to, I'm going to tell you, scare you to death, because you're going to get back a 30-page report, and this home that is likely, possibly a good solid home, is going to have all kinds of flaws to it. That's their job. Their job is to point out anything and everything that is wrong within the home to give you a decision to make. Is this minor stuff? Is this major stuff? Do we renegotiate? Do we continue? Where do we go from here? I will tell you, do not get freaked out when you open a home inspection, because for the most part, things are minor. And with those things being minor, then there's always a resolution to get to the closing table. Now, if the appraiser points out something major, if the inspector points out something major, something red flag, something structural, something safety, pay attention to that, because then you would need to do further investigating. And a lot of times an inspector is not going to go into detail with the recommendations. They're just going to point things out. If there's an electrical issue, they're going to recommend you to talk to a licensed electrician. If there's a structural issue, they're going to ask you to talk to a structural engineer. However, you do have the right to do an inspection. A few years ago during COVID, this was one of the scarier things that we experienced, is because the high demand of homes at the time, people were going in and waiving their inspections. They were going in and they didn't really care. They were just taking it by looking at it, viewing it, but they were not doing a professional inspection. And some people, after the fact, got into their home and realized that there was some pretty substantial issues with the home. So I never recommend waiving an inspection, but it is your right to do that. So what happens when you do the inspection? In the contract, it's going to show you have resolution periods, you have times that you have the opportunity to do the inspection, and then you present the results of what you want fixed back to the seller. When you are doing that, there's a few things to keep in mind of what your options are. Some common options is to present it to the seller, and the seller will go in and make the repairs. That's one option. The second option is for the seller to reduce the purchase price. Maybe they don't want to fool with it. Maybe they just want to come down on the purchase price by $5,000. Then you would just negotiate, your agent would negotiate on your behalf to come in and reduce that purchase price. Another option is the seller, instead of reducing the purchase price, they may want to leave the purchase price the same. However, what they're going to do is give you an additional seller credit towards your closing cost. So depending on how much you've negotiated in the closing cost, they may choose to amend that and increase it by $5,000. So that's one thing to remember when you're looking at the inspection. Another part of this contract is wood destroying insect infestation report. Do keep in mind we are in Tennessee. The only time this is required is on a VA loan. The VA loan is the only loan in the state of Tennessee that requires a termite letter, is essentially what that's called. Just because we don't require it, it doesn't mean I don't recommend it. However, if the appraiser notices, I have had this happen before, that the appraiser noticed something that would potentially give evidence that there were termites, and they made a recommendation for that to get reviewed to see if there were termites in the home. So when you have all of this information, you go through your inspection, you do the termite, just keep in mind the inspections allow you to open back up the negotiation in your transaction. The important thing is that your lender knows if you're making any changes. There's been a lot of times we've ended up at the closing table or close to the closing table only to find out that there was an amendment that we did not know about that resulted from a home inspection. Now, part of this process is the final walkthrough. If you have asked the seller to do certain repairs, if you've asked the seller to do certain things, then you're going to confirm that that is done. You're just not taking their word for it. You and your agent are going to confirm that that is done. I would recommend to do this at least 48 hours before closing, because sometimes it happens the day of closing only to realize that what was agreed upon was not actually done. That can delay closing. Then you're having to call your lender saying, I'm not closing on this because these repairs were not done. So clarity and communication is so important between your agent and the seller's agent to make sure everything is there. It does give you an option to waive all inspections, but we talked about this and I just don't recommend that at all. So the inspection is a crucial part of the process. You do want to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. You're about to invest in a large transaction. You're possibly buying this home. It may be just you, but it may be also, you may have a family. You want to make sure a house is a blessing and not a curse. So you don't want to get in there and go through the process. And let me tell you the reason why I think an inspection is so important. Personal story here. I purchased a home at an auction. At an auction, generally you would have time before the auction to do an inspection. I just showed up at the auction. I did not have a home, and we saw this home. The outside looked beautiful. What we could see by the eye looked beautiful. Everything looked fine. And we raised our hand and they said, sold. It's your home. We go through the process. At that point, the inspection did not matter. Even if we would have done an inspection, we were not getting our money. We were committed to buying that home because we signed a contract to purchase the home as is, where is. We get into the home, and lo and behold, we are doing our own stuff to the home. We're cleaning it, we're painting it, we're doing things like that. And the first night we were working on the home, my wife is turning the water on in one of the bathtubs, and I hear my sister-in-law yelling at me from the basement. It was like a waterfall. The water was just flowing down because the tub was not sealed properly. So that was a mistake on our part. We didn't do our due diligence on that to do the inspection. That's why it is so important. I don't care if you're a first-time home buyer. I don't care if you're a repeat home buyer. It doesn't matter if the property you're buying is 100 years old or 6 months old. A lot of times people think because it's a new construction, an inspection is not needed. That is not the case. Go Google home inspections or go to TikTok and look at home inspections on new construction. You're going to see that you need them because the inspectors are looking at base minimums. They're not looking at the detail of the property. So spend your money wisely. Make sure you invest in a home inspection and make sure that you open that table to negotiation because this is going to be your home, not the seller's anymore. So do keep that in mind. If you have any questions, make sure to leave me a comment. Thank you for tuning in today. Please do me a favor. Go hit the subscribe button for me real quick. Also, hit that like button. Leave me a comment on what you thought. And I look forward to giving you more valuable information in regards to the home buying process.